Thanks, Heidi. Hey guys, I got a little poll I want to take first before we get started. I want you to think of one person that's had a huge influence on your life. All right, so put that person into your mind. And then I want to ask you this question. Was that person largely like you, or was that person largely not like you or different than you? So I'm going to have you vote. So think about that for a second, and then I just want to take a quick poll of the room. So somebody who's made a big difference in your life, somebody that you're just really grateful that maybe God put into your path that has helped shape who you are. Was that person largely like you, or was that person largely not like you? All right, let's raise our hand if that person for you was largely like you. Raise your hand. And now raise your hand if that person was largely not like you. Okay, that is fascinating. Did you see that? About half and half. About half of us would say somebody very much like us shaped who we are today. And about the other half, maybe even more than half, would say, actually, no, that person was quite a bit different. Maybe even I needed a different perspective to help shape me to become the person that I am today. Today, we're going to talk a lot about the social dynamics of the kingdom of God. And we'll get to a point in the text that we're reading out of Luke where a person is saying, I wonder what the banquet of God will be like. And Jesus is going to very specifically teach us that it is not all of the same kind of people. Our challenge today as we go through this text and learn and think about this subject will be, where do I find myself in our world now in terms of living out God's intended social connections within my own sphere? So I think we'll get to the end, and some of us will say, I need to pursue more people like me. I need more support. I need more like-minded folks that can help me thrive. And others of us, I think we'll get to the end and we will say, man, I need people who are different than me. I need to take risks, and I need to find people in spheres that I don't understand to match God's intended goal for my life. So that's where we're going. Before we get there, I want to introduce a term from a kind of a social researcher that was really helpful for me in thinking about this topic. I've heard of and read this guy before. His name's Robert Putnam. He wrote a book called Bowling Alone. And it wasn't until recently that I sort of dug into his material more. But about 20 years ago, he put his energy into the idea of why does it seem like America is getting increasingly disconnected and divided. And I was listening to a talk that he gave, or an interview that he gave in New York Times, and he cited a few evidences that America is sort of dividing as it comes to this social connection. He said loneliness is greater than ever. People are busy. Online connections, which are good but not as rich as in-person connections, are taking the space of in-person connections. He said we have increasing political polarization, inequity, and our culture is increasingly self-centered. Meaning when we think about our world, we tend to think more like, what's in it for me? Sort of like that, ask not your country what you can do for me, but ask your country what you can do for it. He said we're moving farther and farther away from that. One of his graphs that I just thought was really interesting, I'm not sure it totally relates, but I thought this was fascinating. I wanted to bring up. This is how couples meet in the U.S. Look at this. The red line is online. Do you see that? If you follow the lower numbers there, in 1950s, obviously that didn't exist. So most people met through friends, through family, through work, at the bar. And as time has gone on, the only reason I bring this up, one is because I was fascinated by it, right? That's just interesting. I didn't realize how much relationships have shifted. But even more so, what I think is really interesting for us to think about is, what does the fabric of social connection look like for us going forward? And really, even though I'm using the big picture to talk about it, I'm thinking about it actually very personal. So for you and I, how do we think about our social relationships as it relates to moving forward in America? in Bowling Alone, Putnam talks about social capital. So I just want to introduce a couple terms to you. So he says social capital, you can read this on the screen, is our networks of relationship needed to keep people together. He argues that every good society has strong social capital. I don't think we need to question that, right? It's pretty obvious. If you have strong social capital, that means you're able to get things done in society, right? You're able to find connections, meaning, relationships, and you're also able to make movement on problems, social problems, and other problems in the world. And Putnam describes two types of social capital. One is bonding social capital, which is, that's the kind of relationships we have with people that are like us. So bonding relationships are like someone else has red hair and she looks like a good person to marry. And so that's a bonding social capital in a couple ways. Sorry. Bridging social capital is bridging relationships outside of those who are like us, right? That's to people who are a lot different than us. So this capital consists of the ties that link people together, those that are unlike themselves. A couple quotes before we move on from good old Putnam himself, because I think this just illustrates why this is important. The first quote is this: people divorced from community, occupation, and association are the first and foremost among the supporters of extremism. And that makes sense, right? Because when we divorce ourselves from deep connections, we can basically allow our ideas that work really well in a void or in a little, maybe a social bubble where everybody thinks like us. We can allow those ideas to become so real, so big, so expansive that it actually pushes us away from just other people, practical other ideas. And so we become extremists. And I think that's one reason to think about, as we look at this election, there are so many extremist points of view. And if you don't believe me, just look on any comments socially or the way people are interacting with candidates that are different than them, right? And their responses aren't like, I kind of disagree, we're pretty close, but they're probably a little different, right? The comments are extreme, they're built up, they're wide and proud. And that's because when we don't have strong social capital with people that are different than us, we become extreme, and that tears down community. It tears down healthy dialogue and relationships that combat loneliness, and it combats, polarization, etc. Okay, one more quote from this guy. He says this: slavery was, in fact, a social system designed to destroy social capital among slaves and between slaves and free men. Isn't that interesting? Just the very way that I think we can agree slavery wasn't a good idea, right? It wasn't a good thing for humanity. The whole basis of it was, if you do any research and look at how slaves were treated and how masters and slaves were divided, in most part, what happened is slavery broke those relationships. There was no bridging between those kinds of people, which allowed huge atrocities to happen in those contexts. Some of the worst things that have ever happened to humans anywhere on earth happened in slavery. Why? What was the underlying meaning behind that? We were not bridged socially. And so what I can say to you is, as we're about to look at this passage today, we're about to enter into the way Jesus saw social relationships. We're going to ask the question, who are the kinds of people that belonged in a Jesus community? And when Jesus talks about heaven, because he will, how does he envision? What's the makeup of the kinds of people you might be sitting next to? Okay, that's how I want us to think as we enter this, because the Jews and the Pharisees of Jesus' day didn't think very well in this way. And so Jesus was constantly fighting them on this. So with that, why don't we jump into the scripture? I think you'll find it quite interesting as we dig in. We're going to read Luke 14, and I'm I forgot to I think I can. Let me switch to another app here. We're going to read Luke 14 in the NIV. You can follow along on the screen. So here we go. One Sabbath, when Jesus went to eat at the house of a prominent Pharisee, he was being carefully watched. You guys see the scene here? Pharisees were the religious folk, so he was invited over to DJ's house, the pastor of the church. DJ invited a couple people, certainly the elders and the most notable people of our church. And the way these meetings would happen, especially religious meetings would happen, is there was always the poor that would come and gather around the outside, always. Very different from our society, where the poor, we tend to see them located downtown. At this day and age, the poor would follow the wealthy around to try to get their things taken care of. So the people were used to this. They were inoculated to the idea that there would be these people on the fringe that they would sort of step over and ignore to get to the real party. And that's the context of the story today. So there was in front of him a man who was suffering from abnormal swelling of his body. Jesus asked the Pharisees and experts of the law, "Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not?" They didn't know what to say, right? First of all, probably calling out the poor folk. Like, they just didn't know what to do with them. And I don't know about you. Sometimes we get in that place, right? Where we're like, somebody's asking for something. It's when we're in the middle of going somewhere and it's inconvenient. I don't know what to do. And so if somebody would directly say, "Hey, there's a person right there. Should we give them money?" I would feel embarrassed if somebody asked me that in front of somebody that was asking for money, right? That's what's happening here. And they didn't know what to say, and so they didn't respond. Should we do something? Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not? They remained silent. So, taking hold of the man, he healed him and sent him on the way. Then he asked them another question. "If one of you has a child or an ox that falls into a well on the Sabbath day, will you not immediately pull it out?" Again, he leaves that awkward silence. Like, if this was your child, wouldn't you do something? And again, they're like, it's interesting. Their religion actually bound them up. Their faith was something that prevented them from acting. How often do we perceive that maybe our faith is the same way? I think a lot of people in our world assume like to be a Christian is to live with a crutch. It's to be the kind of person that is hindered and walking with restrictions instead of walking with freedom, right? And Jesus is trying to say, no, like any religion that prevents us from full gas, 100% life is missing the point, right? Like this person needs us, but our religion has told us not to do anything on Sundays, right? And this is a problem, he's saying. So they had nothing to say, and so he's going to take another tactic that is along the same lines. He noticed how the guests had picked the places of honor at the table, and so he told them this parable. He's going to tell two parables. First is to the person being invited. Second is to the person hosting the party. So when somebody invites you to a wedding feast, do not take the place of honor, for a person more distinguished than you may have been invited. If so, the host who invited both of you will come and say to you, "Give this person your seat." Then, humiliated, you will have to take the least important place. When you're invited, take the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he will say to you, "Friend, move up to a better place." Then you will be honored in the presence of all the other guests. For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. I wonder what this says about how we view our social lives. He's talking about being invited to a party, and we all know, like, this is a pretty basic human thing, right? Like, we want to be acknowledged or or like we want to be a part of a good social group. If you don't remember this, think back to when you were in middle school, right? And just imagine, like, do you remember the little groups that would sit at the table and everybody would look around and be like, oh yeah, there's the top tier. And like, oh, I'm not in the top tier. And like, maybe I could be invited into that tier. You know, like as we get older, I think we pretend that we've grown up from this. But not totally, right? I mean, I think we know what it means to feel valued in a context of a larger social gathering. And also we know what it feels like to be left into the corner, you know? I mean, I think probably some of us today, even in this social gathering, came in wondering if people would accept me here, right? I mean, that's just the nature of being around other people. And I think the church thing adds extra layers. Like, oh, what these religious people think of me? Do they see me at the bar the other night? Do they know what I'm really? We just think about how do we fit in and what are we doing to belong? And Jesus is saying that self obsession with where you fit is missing what I intend for you. Your obsession with yourself is preventing you from actually being invited in and honored by someone else. You're so busy honoring yourself that you won't let somebody else do it. And he says then this bigger statement, which is the kingdom is the same way, right? Like we don't get into God's kingdom by being really cool. We don't get into God's kingdom by doing all the right things and following the rules and coming in with these merit badges across our chest. Sorry, I always say that because I was a Boy Scout. And every time I would get a new merit badge, they would like give me a patch. And pretty soon the patches would and then you'd wear it to the Boy Scout events. And you'd look at each other like, dang, that dude's got 17 patches. He's way up there, I make fun of that. I use that as an analogy because church is not supposed to be that way. We don't come in with badges where somebody with extra Jesus-y skills gets a leg up. Jesus is now going to talk about this from the host perspective. He says to the host, when you give a luncheon or a dinner, don't invite your friends, your brothers or your sisters, your relatives, or your rich neighbors. If you do, they may invite you back, and so you'll be repaid. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed. Although they can't repay you, you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. Why would God repay us at the resurrection of the righteous for caring for somebody who is poor now? Because God loves the poor. I think a lot of times when we talk about the poor and we talk about socially different people, and we almost make it this play to be like, it's the right thing to do, or you would feel better if you did this. But reality is the base reason we would care for somebody that's different than us is because God cares for those people. He selected them. He loves them. And he wants someone to be caring for them. I mean, one of the big questions from this today, I think, is just real practical. Do you invite the poor to your house? Do you host parties where people that are outcasts belong? Are you okay with the uncomfortable tension that might come from that? We'll come back to some of that. So he goes one more parable. He continues on this theme of social inequity and where do we all fit in this social capital thing. When one of those at the table heard him say this, he said to Jesus, "Blessed is the one who will eat at the feast of the kingdom of God." All right, this may feel like it's out of left field, but what Jesus was saying is, remember, you'll be honored at that feast. So the picture is like when you get to heaven, Jesus is going to bring up, hey, I saw the way you cared for people. I saw the way you cared for the poor. And that caused this person to say, oh man, isn't that going to be great someday? Isn't heaven going to be great? Isn't that feast that we're going to have? Isn't that like climax of what it means to be a human with God? Isn't that going to be incredible? And Jesus takes this as an opportunity to describe, here's what it's going to look like. You ready? Jesus replied, a certain man was preparing a great banquet, and he invited many guests. Other translations talk about this as a wedding feast. I like that idea. Imagine throwing a party for your kid who is getting married, all right? And at the time of the banquet, he sent his servant to tell those who had been invited, come, for everything is now ready. Back in the day, wedding feasts would have been multiple days. I mean, they would just like stop working for a week and they would just get after it. They would just have a blast partying together. And so that party is ready. We've got food and wine. We've got a place for you to stay. All you got to do is get here and we're just going to live it up and we're going to celebrate this new couple. But they all, this is the people that were invited, they all alike began to make excuses. The first said, just bought a field and I must go see it. Please excuse me. That's a good excuse, right? I think so. Another said, I've just bought 5 yoke of oxen and I'm on my way to try them out. Please excuse me. Another good excuse. Still another said, I just got married, so I can't come. I've made that excuse before, right? Like, these are reasonable excuses. Sorry, you're throwing a party. I love that you're throwing the party, but I'm kind of busy. Anybody made an excuse before? Okay, yes. The answer is yes, we all have. So the servant came back and reported this to his master. Then the owner of the house became angry and ordered his servant, go out quickly into the streets, alleys of the town, bring in the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame. All right, I just like that Jesus includes that the guy got pissed off, all right? Because usually you'd think of Jesus telling stories and he's like, the owner, because we think of this as God, right? The owner calculatedly was sad. And he tried to figure, no, he was mad. He was like, what the heck? You said you were coming. I prepared an incredible feast, and now you're too good for it? Come on. Go get the oxen later, right? Hey, if you're married, come celebrate with us, right? Like come and be a part of the party. And I feel angry about this. And then he says, out of that passion, let's go make sure this party is full. And let's invite the people who will actually respond. Why would a poor person respond? Because they don't get invited. Why would a crippled person respond? Because they're used to being left out. These people who do not usually get the benefit of being the center of the attention would be honored. They would be thrilled. They'd be like, you kidding me? I get to come and be a part of this? Let's go. And I am figuring out how to get there. I may stink, but I'm going to get there, you know? And I think it's a great picture. It's a great picture of a feast that's starting to fill up with the most unlikely suspects. Sir, the servant said, what you ordered has been done, but there's still room. Then the master told his servant, go out to the roads, the country lanes, and compel them to come in, so that my house will be, say that word with me, full. What are we talking about? Heaven. Or what's Jesus telling this parable about? He's talking about his kingdom that he is creating for humans to come enjoy. And what does he want it to be? Full. I tell you, not one of those who were invited will get a taste of my banquet. Kind of ends on a sour note, doesn't it? As you read this, what kind of picture do you get of this banquet? Just imagine with me for a little bit. Do you picture any awkward moments? For sure, right? Like it's just, there's going to be some like touch and go here. These people obviously maybe don't know each other as well, or maybe they don't know the social norms of the party, and so they don't know quite how to act. Like how fast do I drink my wine? You know, like do we get after it right away here, or are we waiting on it a little bit? You know, how many more courses are coming? Sorry, I didn't know there was another one, so I ate like 3. But I'll still eat the next one. Do you get the picture of it's almost like they don't deserve to be here. They don't get the norm. They don't fit the bill. It's awkward a little bit. And yet, now I want you to imagine the joy on their faces. Do you picture anybody that's having the time of their life? Do you picture anybody that's like, are you kidding me? Like, how did I get in? Right? Do you picture anybody that like doesn't seemingly really belong there, that just is like, I can't believe I got to be a part of this? I want you to now picture the power of that event for that person. For the person that didn't belong, Like, what does it do for their humanity, their sense of value, their sense of belonging, maybe to the community? Jesus tells these stories because he wants our imagination to come alive. He wants us to start thinking and imagining, what kind of world does he intend? And so with that in mind, right, this is our story for today. Now let's just jump right to here. Do you think of the same kind of way of church? Do you think of the parties that we throw in the same kind of way? Do you think of the same kind of people belonging in this environment? I want to talk a little bit about what causes a person to say, I'm busy, I'm good. What do you think? What causes somebody who is invited and they've got this incredible invitation? What causes them to be like, I don't need that, actually. I'm busy. That person probably feels privileged. Maybe they've had a lot of opportunities to go to parties before. They're used to it. They maybe have lost the value of that party. They've forgotten why it was so cool in the first place, right? I want you to think about this in terms of it's let's call them rich in this case. The rich people in this story are not being excluded, they're opting out. How does that make you feel about the potential that we have for opting out in a way that's really damaging for the kingdom? And I'm not just talking about heaven, I'm talking about participating in whatever God wants to be doing on earth. Why might you and I opt out of that mission? I've already done that before. I'm happy, I'm content, I feel pretty satisfied with my faith, with my church walk, with my walk with God. I don't need to be challenged anymore. It's uncomfortable. I don't want to be a part of a party with those kinds of people. I want us to think through all this kind of imagery because it has direct application to our lives, right? And I just as a person who has been a part of a church for a while, I just want to say it's really easy for me to lose this perspective. It's easy for me to just start cruise control church on Wednesday, right? And forget what it means to be the kind of person that's ruthless about catching and inviting the next person that doesn't think they belong here. I want to let's transition now to practical. How do we do this? And I want to think in terms of two things that I brought up already. Bridging and bonding social capital. So all of us, Putnam argues that we all need both. We both need bonding social capital, which is with people like us, and we need bridging social capital, which is with people not like us. As I told you before, and where I was leading to this was, I really feel like this practical invitation from this passage is to ask the question for you, which one of those is God inviting me to invest in? So let's talk about those for a little bit. Bonding are people like you. And in this case, I'm going to make a reach here and assume that you might be hearing this as a Christian or a person who wants to be in a Christian context. Some of us are so busy serving and loving and caring for other people that we don't have a commitment to our own like-minded group of people. We don't actually prioritize our spiritual lives. And so we find ourselves coming to church once in a while, right? When we think of church, we think of it, it's there for me when I need it. They meet every Wednesday, but I'm pretty good most of the time. So I just come when I need it. What I would say is to be a person who intentionally invests in an environment and a place that is like-minded. That is the foundation that you build in your identity so that you can thrive as a child of God. So as a person who is trying to follow the ways of Jesus, it is so hard to do that. You have to commit to those environments. You have to make them a priority. Our family talks about rhythm all the time. Rhythm being we pick our rhythms and we judge ourselves based on how well we hold to the things that we value. We do those residually because we need those as refreshers. So some of you may need to make a commitment to church, to coming to church consistently. It may not be what you want to do, but you may recognize, you know what? I'm actually a lot like that person that's busy and has all kinds of excuses. But I'm not growing. I'm not getting better as a son or daughter of God. And so I want to. That may be your commitment. Another person's commitment around this may be a smaller community of believers, right? We call them small groups here. People call them all kinds of things, but it's just a committed group of people where you can share life together on a residual basis. I think there's 4 of those groups, and actually right now we're increasing the number of those because of how important it is to have this bonded social connection within a church community. And some of you just need this little push to be oh yeah, I need more support in my life. I need to talk through my crap with safe people so that I can grow and be prayed for and cared for and level up as I want to be like Jesus. Some of us need to make those commitments. There's many more. Those were a few suggestions. There's many more we can make to bond socially in a way that supports our faith. For others of us, it's this bridging idea. It's this idea that I need to actually spend time with people that are not like me. I've gotten so busy in life that when I look around, everybody I look at is the people that are like me. And because of that, I am making no difference towards creating the kind of heaven that God wants on earth. I am opting out of caring for those people that are maybe the poor, maybe are the blind or the lame, or maybe are those metaphorically, right? I'll say just as a personal anecdote, Vanessa and I were talking the other day about, she went to a wedding and she's a wedding photographer, and this wedding was out there. It was a different environment than church. I'll just say it that way. And she was talking about, and then I was reflecting with her how uncomfortable I feel in those kinds of scenarios. This is just me being really honest. I feel I don't know what to do or say or how to bridge those gaps. And we were talking, this was before this sermon came up, we were just talking about we need to find more intentional ways to bridge gaps with people that are different than us. We just need to find somebody that we're oh, normally I wouldn't spend time with you. And we need to have them over for dinner. And we need to be curious about their life and care about them. Walk with them, maybe go to their party and just be in the middle of it and experience. Because again, this story is about God saying, I want this place to be full. I care about all these kinds of people. You don't get to opt out and say, oh, those kind of people, I'm going to stay away. So how would we do that? A couple of practicals. Invite somebody over for dinner that's different than you. That's a really good one, I think. Another one might be to volunteer for an organization that supports people that might fall into these marginalized categories. right? The people that Jesus was talking about, there's a reason he talks about the poor. They were marginalized. They were not given the same opportunities that people who had money were in that society. It's probably not a lot different in our society. And so a practical way that you and I can do that is we can just put it on our schedule. I know most of us are so busy that we're literally I don't have time for more stuff. And I would say, take stuff out. You're doing things that are preventing you from functioning in the way Jesus desires you to function. I think this needs to be a challenge for all of us. We need to hear this and feel uncomfortable. We're I don't want to leave from church and go do something different. Well, then stop following Jesus because he will make you uncomfortable. He will push you to be the bridge that he wants to be in this world. And so there's more ideas. I'm sure we could think of a lot of ideas if we had more time here. I'll come back and close with that last question, which is, which one of those social capitals do you need to grow in? Are you willing to identify it now before you walk out? Are you willing to say, I'm going to explore being around more like-minded people? Or I'm going to commit to bridging a gap with somebody that I normally wouldn't. I'll close by saying you can't grow spiritually without people. You can't. There is no way you can go off into the desert for years and years and become this great spiritual person. Because God built us in their image. You know the scriptures say that in Genesis? Let us build them in our image, communal. God, the Trinity, multifaceted. Humans, community, multifaceted. If you want to grow, if you're leaving here and saying I came to the vineyard today because I want to grow, then you need to respond to this message. All right? You can actually do that tonight with our little party dessert night. Stick around, hang out with some people, get to know some people that are different than you. Don't run out and don't have excuses. Give us at least 10 minutes, okay? That's it, all right? God bless you guys. Let's say this together before we leave. We've reached up to God. Now let's reach out to our world. All right, have a good night.